Welcome back, everyone. This is part 4, the final part for today. This is GGN. My website is ggnonline.net. And on YouTube, my channels are ddarko2012 and ddarko2013. Alright, I'm going to cover social engineering and all kinds of different stuff in here, maybe some eco-terrorism. I kind of brushed on this article briefly on Monday towards the end, so I thought I'd go a little bit more into it and then segue into some other stuff. Time magazine asks, who needs kids anyways? So it goes on here, and it says here that the person who read this, the authors, just saw this, and at the time, a child-free life, when having it all means not having children, says a child-free life, the blazing across the cover, they just sort of rolled their eyes when having it all. So it says here, they looked at the cover of the photo of a young woman, a relaxed couple lounging on the beach. The woman wore giant sunglasses and a little Mona Lisa smile that I guess is supposed to communicate her disdain for her uterus and her utter satisfaction with her size 4 cellulite-free vacation-filled life. So, cover photo lady has lots of company. The American birth rate has literally never been lower in our recorded history. It includes the Great Depression when people were too busy being greatly depressed to have babies. Time tells us that the birth rate declined 9% between 2007 and 2011, which apparently is like, whoa. So, in other words, more and more American women are looking at the modern motherhood and saying, you know what, no. And after exploring the many reasons why women might decide not to procreate, and it's usually looked at as a woman's decision, not so much as the man's, Times Lauren Sanders decides that this is a pretty cool decision. So what are the reasons? Unfortunately, they are painfully obvious, and in my openly biased opinion, tiresome. Our lives are so great already. My mom had 16 kids, and she was always tired, and her life sucked. I want to do what I want to do. I'm afraid I would be such a devoted and awesome parent that everything else would suffer, etc. So this is where I talked about Monday too, but in some of the women interviewed for the article, there are surprise hints of regret. This 27-year-old Knoxville, Tennessee woman who keeps a baby box in the closet with a pink tutu she once bought for an imaginary infant girl. Her explanation is that the box is an indulgent of a life I have to grieve. If we decided to have children, we'd have to grieve the life we currently have. So what life do they currently have? Leah commits her time to working on her own creative projects and starting up a bakery. Her husband writes a blog and works in customer service at a credit card processing company. So the author says, does anyone else feel like one day Leah and Paul might find the grief for the family they have never had far outweighs the grief of over blogging and baking? And lastly, someone from the London School of Economics said that they've begun to present scholarship asserting that the more intelligent women are, the less likely they are to become mothers. Lots of siblings, your divorce risk may be lower. A new study finds lower risk of divorce in those with multiple siblings. So a new study suggests that for each additional brother or sister a person has, that person's chances of getting divorced go down by 2%. But it says the effect wears off after around 7 siblings. Study suggests siblings help nurture social skills that later come in handy during married life. 78 children from the Oklahoma Department of Human Services custody have gone missing. So it says that 38 of them have been missing for more than 3 months. It says this is ridiculous, a former volunteer for the court-appointed special advocate program. They said when DHS has a child removed from his or her parents, especially when the reason for the removal stems from allegations of neglect rather than abuse, I feel that DHS should have as much responsibility to provide supervision and ensure the child's safety as they are attempting to acquire from the child's parents. I remember we just talked about one that was in their custody that died. They can define neglect as anything, as naming your child a certain thing, or if your parents are on medical marijuana, they can kidnap your kids, abduct them, so you're neglecting them, whatever. It says there are more than 10,000 children in state custody. Most live in foster homes, while many stay in shelters and group homes. Many of the children want more independence, and some choose to run away. They run away to reunite with parents the state officials have deemed unsuitable, but I've had just as many run just because they didn't want to follow the rules. Russia closes 700 schools amid dramatic drop in birth rates. More than 700 Russian schools are set to close this year because of a slump in the number of children of school age. They saw a birth rate drop dramatically in the turbulent 1990s, and its demographic situation has remained negative, with more deaths than births ever since. Vladimir Putin last year urged Russians to have at least 3 children. So it's like the complete opposite of what the West is teaching. For some reason, we have forgotten why we came into this world, and we came in with only one aim: to create new life, to continue our line. That was a public health official for them. The recent uptick in births is partly driven by a wave of immigrants from the ex-Soviet states where larger families are the norm. And this is all part of this global agenda that I've talked about. It's happening in the United States, it's happening in Europe as well. And you take out the immigration numbers, you actually see that they have a negative birth rate all around the board, all across the boards. Russia has a population of 143 million people. The worst case scenario shows the population could fall to 130 million by 2030. All right, next up, U.S. Olympic chief says athletes must respect a nation's laws. In an interview with R Sport, the CEO of the U.S. Olympic Committee, Scott Blackmun, says he expects athletes to respect the law in the country of competition in reference to Russia's anti-gay legislation. So they said here that we read the law, there's 200 committees, and it's not workable for each of them to develop its own interpretation approach with respect to the law. Lastly, he says our job, first and foremost, is to make sure that our athletes are prepared to compete and aren't distracted while they're here. Where a sports organization will leave the diplomacy on the legal issues up to the diplomats, and we're not going to get involved. D.C. mayor acts as gospel singer from Martin Luther King Memorial Concert because he is an ex-gay. So the mayor admitted Monday that he made his final decision to remove gospel singer Donnie McClurkin from the lineup performances at a sponsored event on Saturday, the MLK Memorial, in response to complaints by gay activists who contacted the mayor's office to complain about his inclusion in the show because the gospel singer is a vocal ex-gay who believes homosexuality is a curse which can be overcome through prayer and determination. They threatened to protest the event if he was even allowed to perform. Soon after it was announced that he would no longer be part of the program. Fox News host shocked by transgender rights. Of course, this is coming from Raw Story, again, a liberal site. I can't get my head around this. So conservative pundit, and again, I don't watch any of this crap, but I just try to pick a little parts of the news here and there. Michelle Malkin and the host of Fox and Friends Tuesday expressed outrage and confusion after California governor signed a transgender rights law allowing students to choose which gender identity they prefer. She says, I don't know where to start on this. She says, is this children who consider themselves a different gender and have not gone through some sort of surgery? Is this a child who is conflicted about their sexuality and chooses one day to use the boys' bathroom as opposed to a girl's? She goes, there is such an impetus to pander to political correctness. I think this is social engineering run amok. Apparently, according to the bill, transgender is defined any way they want to. They think it usurps local, parental, and community control. Talking about social engineering, Martin, remember this? The Trayvon Martin family attorney says it was her duty to be a social engineer, even though they lost. She has a greater duty beyond being an attorney. That's to be a social engineer.
Everything from Eric Holder and his pursuit of voter suppression efforts, which target disproportionately minorities, to the mandatory minimum sentencing and trying to strike that down at the federal level, to the president's address and remarks ad hoc as they were on Trayvon Martin and race a few weeks ago. I mean, I think he, as America's first black president, is really owning that in a way that he didn't in his first term.
Right, and it will be interesting to see what happens on each of these issues as the second term progresses. There's another possibility here, though, that I think is important that sort of lingers below the level of political rhetoric, and that's the question of what if this country is actually more racist than we acknowledge, right? So in 2008, Annenberg does a big poll around the election, and they ask non-black respondents to rank members of their own race and African Americans on a scale of 1 to 100 on trustworthiness, work ethic, and intelligence. And across the country, not just conservatives, white voters ranked whites 15 points ahead of blacks on each of those measures. That's astonishing. The numbers were, as you might expect, strongest in the Deep South. 6 of the 8 states that were highest on this list were Louisiana, Mississippi, states like this. One of the things that was interesting to me is that the states that ended up lowest on that list, places where there was the least racism, were not the most liberal states or the most cosmopolitan states. They were the whitest states. They were places like North Dakota and Idaho and northern New England. And so there's this just lingering craziness that still sort of exists out there. And I think one thing that, obviously there's a tactics to the take on Obama. Obviously there's a tactics to the take on voting rights. But it also seems to me like we have to consider the possibility, and I think the president is sort of considering this in some of his rhetoric, that we're just a bit more racist than we like to think.
So there you go, folks. And when we talk about racist, it's always it's slanted the one way, right? He even said that that was for whites. There's here white. I wasn't even going to cover this article. White people back academic merit when it helps white students. So racism is always one way, and you've heard this before. It's code word for anti-white, and I'm pretty much done. I'm still going to mention this sometimes, but it's just the white guilt that's out there and people that are naive, and there's not much community among the white community anyways, so my belief is that they're going to pretty much get everything that they deserve, so. But it's not completely their fault. It's 50% their fault for being a kind of spineless cowards, but also they have a good reason to be, which is to be politically correct, because if they don't, they won't get a job. They'll be socially isolated. They'll be labeled as a racist, basically for looking out for their tribe. So everybody else is able to do that except for them. The idea of academic merit is most appealing to white people when it helps white students, according to new research. They show respondents favored high test scores in academic achievement when asked to rank admission criteria for University of California schools. But see, this is where it gets sticky, though, right? But when a separate group of respondents was informed that Asian Americans are heavily represented among UC undergraduate population, it was more likely to de-emphasize academic scores as admission factors. And like I said before, as far as multiculturalism goes, for Europe and other places, in Africa, China, I would be against it. But here in the United States, most white people, we don't have a leg to stand on, and nor does anybody else except for the indigenous population as far as their being at their homeland. So there's no ties to the land. There's no need to stick together. And what they're trying to do here is to get people to not think to look out for their own people. So ultimately, what I see as far as the fate of the United States is it will eventually just die off. It won't work, this experiment of multiculturalism. The only reason I say multiculturalism is the only solution for the United States because it's the death of culture. You have to define what multiculturalism is and what they're proposing it to be. So it's actually the death of culture, an individual's culture, so that's why I don't support it. But in the United States, it could actually mean that people maintain whatever culture they have left besides just consumerism and entertainment. So then we have this article, Minnesota man removed from coma after fierce mob beating by 50 youths. So 4 arrests have been made in the case of a Minnesota man who remains in stable but critical condition following the beating of by a group of some 50 youths, the majority of whom were in black gangs. Now, of course, this is from InfoWars. This is what they're saying. I don't know what evidence they have, but I went into the article and they just call them youths, and they call it kind of like a melee or a fight. They jumped this guy, they beat him, and this was definitely race. There's nothing on the mainstream media about this. So a detail which has led many to label the altercation of a black on white hate crime. But when you look at this, it may not have even been that. It says here that some girls at the party, a witness says, started fighting outside, and that everyone went outside to watch the fight. She saw numerous people from the party fighting. So it says witnesses say this individual, a master control operator for a public access channel, an aspiring filmmaker, walked in the crowd and was assailed by a man wielding a can and a sock, which hit his head and caused him to fall to the ground bleeding. Another person said that he was struck in the head and was kicked, stomped, and stripped by a bunch of people. He was recently removed out of his medically induced coma, although he is still in critical condition. Police initially believed the incident was gang-related. However, according to the Minnesota law, aggravating factors need to be considered, including a possible factor of racial bias, according to the Pioneer Press. Then we have 19 shocking examples of how political correctness is destroying America. The first one, of course, is the Missouri State Fair permanently banned a rodeo clown from performing just because he wore an Obama mask. Now all of the other rodeo clowns are required to take sensitivity training. Government workers in Seattle have been told they can no longer use the word citizen and brown bag because they are potentially offensive. A Florida police officer recently lost his job for calling Trayvon Martin a thug on Facebook. Climate change deniers are not wanted at the U.S. Department of Interior. The Interior Secretary said, "I hope there are no climate change deniers in the Department of Interior." A professor at Ball State was banned from even mentioning the concept of intelligent design because it would supposedly violate the academic integrity of the course he was teaching. And we have the Chuck Schumer trying to embarrass Putin in Russia. Chaplains in the U.S. military being forced to perform gay marriages. High school track team was disqualified because he made a gesture of thanking God when he crossed the finish line, and a 6-year-old was ordered to remove the word God from a poem she wrote in honor of her grandfathers from veterans from Vietnam. Thank you.